Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
Hello and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here's our show for tonight. The new year has brought devastation and disaster to Japan. The damage caused by the earthquake is there for the world to see, shock after shock. Just when the people of Japan were picking up the pieces, another shocking disaster happened in the skies. A plane burst into flames on the runway of one of Japan's busiest airports. 5 people were killed in the collision with another aircraft. The visuals are terrifying. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has confirmed that there was in fact a collision between a passenger plane and a Coast Guard aircraft. He calls it a saddening situation. In our top story on Gravitas tonight, we show you what happened and ask you, is it even safe to fly anymore? Also on the show, we show you the aftermath of the massive quake which jolted Japan. While the Japanese stayed calm as buildings fell around them, the true scale of devastation is only coming to light now. We put 2 leading British media outlets under the scanner tonight because of their miserable and misleading reportage on India. The India growth story hasn't gone down too well with its former colonizer, and we call out those who continue to spew agenda without any facts. China, meanwhile, has a new problem on its hand. How will it market and sell that miraculous anti-aging product now that there are no donkeys at its disposal? The African Union and Brazil are set to ban donkey trade with China. We'll tell you all about China's dirty tricks to work around this ban. Can we ever be safe in an airplane? As you think about this, let me show you visuals of a burning plane from Japan. This was a Japan Airlines plane. It departed from Sapporo at 4 p.m. local time. The plane was supposed to land at Tokyo's Haneda airport at 5:40 in the evening. There were 379 passengers and crew members on board. The plane did manage to land on time, but upon landing, it collided with a Coast Guard plane. The Coast Guard plane was supposed to fly to Niigata. It was going to help with the earthquake rescue and relief operations. There were 6 Coast Guard members on board. 5 of them have died. The pilot, we are told, managed to evacuate, but he has suffered serious injuries. How did the 2 planes collide? We don't know. One passenger told the local media that she felt a bump while landing, almost as if the plane was colliding with something. She saw a spark outside and soon the cabin was filled with smoke. The moment was recorded on camera. Take a look. In another video, you can see passengers sliding down the burning plane. All passengers and crew members managed to escape the burning plane. The Haneda airport shut down all runways. Flights were diverted to nearby airports. Some analysts in Japan said that they had never seen something like this in the history of Japan's civil aviation. It's true that Japan's civil aviation has a pretty good safety record. There have been no fatal accidents in this century. But after looking at these visuals, these shocking, terrifying visuals, we can't help but ask, will flying ever be safe? The passengers on board this burning plane were very lucky. They had time to escape death. But what if time would not have been in their favor? Why were they put in this situation in the first place? The air traffic control is supposed to prevent such accidents. It is supposed to ensure that a plane's landing path is cleared. It is supposed to ensure that planes simply don't collide. So what went wrong here? Tokyo's Haneda is no ordinary airport, remember that. It is in fact one of Japan's busiest. Nearly 90 million passengers land or take off from this airport each year. A commercial jet is currently falling apart at Haneda. The visuals are likely to continue to haunt every flyer long after this fire is doused. Are the British biased against India and in particular against Indian Hindus? Why do the British dislike Indians so much? Is there hidden resentment against their success both in India and in Britain? Is it because Indians in Britain are at the top wherever you look in Britain? That they don't fit into stereotypes, you don't hear of them being involved in terrorism. So I ask, why the resentment? And why can't the British accept that independent India is now one of the world's rising powers economically, politically, intellectually, and culturally? Could it possibly be true that 1947 still rankles the memory of being thrown out of India? India was supposed to collapse into chaos after the British left. They left India brutally partitioned. Instead, India blossomed. But that surely can't be the reason. Then why? I want to point your attention to a survey, an opinion poll. Its results have just been released. It was carried out among British Indians and Hindus staying in the United Kingdom. Here's what it found. 91% of British Indians and Hindus said that British journalists reporting on India were biased. Their reports were unbalanced. They were slanting stories towards continuous negativity that had little positive to report. 89% said the British media was not impartial about India. The BBC was called out, with 91% saying the British broadcasting company is the most unreliable source of information on India. The Guardian, they said, is not far behind. Frankly, I'm not surprised. Let's do an experiment. Do one thing tonight. Go to the Guardian website and search for India. you'll be treated to a series of negative stories on India. That's it. Concerns raised over what a third term for Narendra Modi would mean for the country amid rising Hindu-Muslim tensions. That's one. The Pannoon plot. US lawyer allegedly targeted in Indian murder plot. Let's talk about the reportage on Kashmir's special status. Negative, of course. They refuse to see the swelling crowds enjoying themselves in Srinagar on New Year's Eve, or the peace that has come to the valley finally. If the Guardian newspaper is to be believed, India is in a state of constant disharmony, religious persecution, oppression of minorities, basically all things negative. And that is exactly why this survey becomes prime time news tonight. And the results become problematic, to say the least. What the British public read is what they believe. And the British press is feeding its people dirt on India. In April 2023, an Indian student at the London School of Economics was stopped from contesting college elections. Why? The student said that some people in the campus could not bear to see an Indian Hindu leading the students' union, so they cancelled him. Earlier in 2021, another Indian student was cyber-bullied into quitting from her post as the president of the Oxford University Student Union. Imagine that. So has the British media fanned this bias? Is it guilty of whipping anti-India sentiments across the country? You see, mass media is a powerful tool. Like I was telling you, what you see is what you believe. The question is, what explains the British media's negative projection of India? What is it that the BBC has against India? Because the BBC's anti-India campaign goes way back. For British journalists, India is still mired in poverty and despair. Of course, no one ever mentions that India's poverty and despair in 1947 were a British legacy. The British came to an India that was rich, an India that had 23% of global GDP. 200 years of exploitation later, the British left India as one of the world's poorest countries with just 2% share in the global GDP. In the 1970s, India was moving on, but the BBC decided to strike with its one-sided narration of the India story. From politics to policies, the BBC has tried to misreport on everything India. In 2017, the BBC ran this headline: Kaziranga, the park that shoots people to protect rhinos. The piece read, and I quote, "The way the park protects the animals is controversial. Its rangers have been given the kind of powers to shoot and kill normally only conferred on armed forces policing civil unrest. At one stage, the park rangers were killing an average of 2 people every month, more than 20 people a year. Indeed, in 2015, more people were shot dead by park guards than rhinos were killed by poachers. Innocent villagers, mostly tribal people, have been caught up in the conflict." That's what the BBC reported. The BBC's then South Asia correspondent questioned, has India's war against poaching gone too far? The BBC also produced a documentary, Killing for Conservation. It questioned the ethical legitimacy of the shoot-at-sight order for poachers. Guess what happened? Kaziranga National Park called out the BBC's misleading reportage, following it up with a point-by-point rebuttal. The park said that the rangers don't just shoot at sight. A warning is given beforehand. Shots are fired only and only if the warning is ignored, or the rangers are shot at first, or if the rangers feel there is an immediate danger to the prized and endangered one-horned rhinoceros. The BBC was forced to apologize. And how can we possibly forget the distasteful series on India's Prime Minister? The hate piece was reeking of propaganda. Why did the British press have to stoop so low? Is it hard for the British media to digest that the country the Great Britain once ruled is now a bigger economy than their own? That India is now employing British citizens, becoming an investment hub for British money, while BBC and Guardian may have been named and shamed. The bias against India goes far beyond these media houses. I will give you an example. In 2023, when India became the first country to touch down on the moon's south pole, one British anchor tried to explain to his viewers why it would be a great idea to ask India to return British aid. Listen in.
To congratulate India on landing on the dark side of the moon, I would also like to now invite India to return the £2.3 billion foreign aid money that we sent them between 2016 and 2021. We're also set to give them £57 million next year, but I think the British taxpayer should keep hold of that, don't you? We should not be giving money to countries with a space programme. As a rule, if you can afford to fire a rocket at the dark side of the moon, you shouldn't be coming to us with your hand out.
This British anchor is talking about aid. That's non-existent. So I ask, is this a classic case of colonial ego being hurt? When was the last time the British landed on the moon? The answer is never. And this could also be the answer to why the British press is so desperate to write off India's growth story and the success of Indians in the United Kingdom. Data collected in 2021 found that the Hindus living in the UK are among the healthiest. 87.8% of Hindus reported very good or good health. This was far above the national average. The data also found that Hindus were more qualified in comparison to the overall population. In other words, the Indian origin people living in the United Kingdom are faring better than the natives. The British press, it seems, is feeling sick. Our next story is straight out of a science fiction thriller. It concerns the future of warfare. A future that will not be about bombs or bullets, but about electromagnetic energy, a type of warfare that the military forces across the globe are keen on winning even before it starts. Too bad. One country may have left them all behind. China. It has unveiled a new type of electric warfare weapon, a weapon which can launch multiple focus beams of electromagnetic waves from a single antenna. By doing so, it can simultaneously target various objects in the sky, sea, or on land to disrupt their operations. So what is this weapon? Who has invented it? And how lethal is it? Let's take these questions one at a time. To start with, a group of scientists from China has unveiled an intricate design of this weapon. The scientists in question belong to the Southeast University in Nanjing. They have published key algorithms and manufacturing methods of the weapon. The details have been published in a peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of University of Electronic Science and Technology of China. In this paper, the scientists have predicted how future warfare will undergo significant changes. Changes which will primarily be characterized by, and I'm quoting here, increasingly fierce competition between opposing sides in the electromagnetic spectrum battlefield. Yes, you heard the words, an electromagnetic battlefield. As for the weapon, its hazardous potential was revealed after lab tests were conducted on its miniaturized version. In this version, scientists tested the weapon's ability to operate at high power. Also, whether it can emit electromagnetic waves across a broad frequency range. Besides this, researchers also found that anti-jamming techniques will fail in front of these Chinese weapons. This is what the scientists had to say about the discoveries in the published paper. Allow me to quote again. The future of warfare is set to undergo major changes. Losing control of the electromagnetic spectrum will inevitably lead to the loss of air and sea control. To adapt to high-intensity confrontational environments, electronic countermeasure systems must possess multifunctional, multi-target countermeasure and broadband capabilities. Now here's the thing. At present, most electronic warfare equipment in use is aimed at continuous suppression and high power against targets in more or less the same direction. The most notable examples of these are electronic warfare pods, which were deployed on the US F-15 and F-16, or the Russian MiG-27 and MiG-29 fighter jets. But this Chinese weapon can launch focus beams in multiple directions. And that's where the difference lies. By the way, this is not the only futuristic weapon China has discovered. Earlier this month, Chinese researchers also unveiled an invisibility cloak. An innovation which challenges the conventional notions of visibility and ushers a new dangerous era where the line between seen and the unseen becomes blurred. The cloak in question relies on cutting-edge materials designed to manipulate light and offer a tangible solution to achieving optical invisibility. So from electromagnetic guns to invisibility cloaks, China is making big strides in the field of warfare and technology. Perhaps this is a sign for other countries to buckle up. The new year started on an ominous note in Japan. An earthquake of magnitude 7.6 jolted the country. More than 200 aftershocks have been detected since then. Yes, 200. At least 55 people are dead. Many others lie trapped under the rubble. Rescuers are rushing to find the survivors. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida says it is a battle against time. Just look at these visuals now. This is how parts of Japan look now. Houses have been reduced to rubble. Buildings have been toppled. Those standing have plumes of smoke rising from them. Roads are completely wrecked.
石川県輪島市の上空です。7時53分、石川県輪島市の上空です。地震の
Let's look at it on a map now. This is Japan's Ishikawa Prefecture. This is the Noto Peninsula. It extends into the Sea of Japan. It was the epicenter of the earthquake. Most of the damage and loss of life are concentrated here. But the tremor shook buildings as far away as 300 kilometers in Tokyo, and even beyond the country's borders. Soon after the quake, tsunami followed. The waves hit Japan's western seaboard. Houses and cars were swept into the water. People in coastal areas fled to higher ground. The tsunami warnings have now been lifted, but authorities are expecting more tremors in the coming days. Rescue operations are underway, but roads are blocked, if not badly damaged. So reaching the worst hit areas in Noto Peninsula has become a challenge in itself. One of the airports has been forced to close down due to cracks in runways. More than 500 people remain stranded. Bullet trains were halted. Sections of major highways were completely closed down. Mobile phone networks were also damaged. 33,000 homes were left without electricity. Nearly 20,000 without water. Yesterday, when the news came, various clips recorded by eyewitnesses surfaced. They showed the true scale and the intensity of the earthquake. But what was most striking in these videos was the calmness of the people. A subway station flooded in Kanazawa. Things were falling off the shelves in a shop, but people crouched wherever they happened to be or walked out and waited for the tremor to pass. Many just patiently watched as the Oyama shrine shook. Others were wooed by snow falling off the building in Nagano.
Wow, it's huge. Oh, holy cow.
What could be pegged as a reason behind this extraordinary calm? Was it the frequency of earthquakes in Japan? Did people think of it as just another tremor? Or was it the faith that they have in their infrastructure, in their government? If so, then the Met Agency has some tough questions to answer to its people. You see, the magnitude of the earthquake was 7.6. But Japan has a unique system to record seismic intensity. It's called Shindo. It measures the shaking at a certain location on a scale of 1 to 7. The magnitude remains constant, but Shindo varies depending on its distance from the epicenter. The bigger the number, the bigger the tremor. So when the quake struck, the Met Agency reported that its Shindo reading was 7, the highest on the scale. But later the department corrected itself. The revised reading was 3. Can you imagine? From 7 to 3. That's a pretty big margin of error. The agency officials apologized for the mistake at a midnight press conference. The Japanese were calm before, but once the death toll began to mount, when the damage was assessed, when more than 100,000 were ordered to evacuate their homes, the realization kicked in. The residents are left traumatized. They had to move to emergency shelters. Many were not able to sleep all night. Listen to their ordeal yourself.
It's because people have trauma. Even if it shakes a little during aftershocks, they become very anxious. It was the same for me, and it was the same for everyone.
Around here we get earthquake intensity levels of 2 or 3, or at the biggest maybe a low of 5, but not big ones like this. This was the first time.
In the coastal town of Suzu, there are only 5,000 households. Up to 90% of them are now believed to be destroyed. In Wajima city, the fires were still burning till morning. More than 100 buildings and houses have been razed to the ground. In Nanao, houses came collapsing down on parked cars. Windows were smashed. Products once meant for sale in convenience stores were seen strewn across the ground. Similar scenes were seen in Kanazawa, if not worse. As you can see, the aftermath is devastating. The air of calmness has all but disappeared, and the reality has sunk in. For thousands, it's going to take days to return to any kind of normalcy. China was already struggling with monkey business. Now its donkey business also hangs in balance. No, I'm not kidding. The African Union and Brazil are set to ban donkey trade with China. Beijing was facing a shortage of donkeys as it is. Now it faces yet another blow to its supply chains. So what is this all about? Why does China need so many donkeys to begin with? You see, it has an insatiable appetite for a traditional medicine called Ajiao. This medicine claims to have anti-aging properties. It is made using donkey skin. The donkey collagen is mixed with herbs and other ingredients and then sold in the form of bars, pills and liquids. The demand for this medicine is so high that China needs about 5 million donkeys every year. This accounts for roughly 10% of the donkey population globally. But it can make up for only 2 million of them domestically. The rest are imported. Any obstacle to their imports is likely to put pressure on Asia production, the miracle medicine. Not to forget, donkeys are stubbornly difficult to breed. The gestation period can last more than a year. It's difficult to amp up their breeding and make up for lost stock. But China's appetite is never ending. And it is not only fueling a domestic shortage, but an international one as well. Africa, China's biggest market for donkey import, is trying to fix this. Last month, the African Union called for a 15-year ban on the slaughter of donkeys and also on the export of their skins. The union members are yet to decide on the same. Another big market for donkey skins is Brazil, but it is one step closer to banning donkey and horse slaughter as well. Why so? You see, for Brazilians, donkeys hold a lot of cultural significance and they don't want to sacrifice donkeys for China anymore. Countries such as Tanzania and Ivory Coast have already banned donkey skin trade a few years ago. 4 Chinese-owned donkey slaughterhouses were shut down in Kenya. This was after a rise in donkey theft. In Africa and Brazil also move forward with the donkey export bans. China will effectively lose 2 of the biggest markets in the trade. So what will it do to keep the Asia industry alive? Will it turn to illicit methods? Well, reports say it already has. China is stealing donkeys from the poor, from those whose livelihoods depend on them. I'm talking about small African farmers. They need donkeys to transport their produce. Yes, for the rural poor in Africa, donkeys are vital beasts of burden. More so in hot, dry and remote areas. Even in harsh environments, donkeys can travel long distances with a heavy load without fatigue. But petty thieves in Africa are aware of China's needs, so they steal from the farmers and sell off the donkeys to the dragon. Of the 3 million or so donkey hides that China imports each year, a good 25 to 35% come from stolen animals. You see, it's a vicious cycle. Due to a higher demand, donkey prices have skyrocketed, and because of that, theft has become more rampant. This has further driven poor African farmers out of the market because those who fall victim to donkey theft don't have the money to buy them back. Although China gets donkey hides from Pakistan and Australia as well, Africa remains its key target. That is both in terms of the number of donkeys killed and the scale of impact on small-scale farmers. Take a look. Consider this. In 2020, the world was reportedly home to some 53 million donkeys. 99% of them were found in low and middle-income countries. Some 63% were found in Africa. Now African countries are trying to address this issue. They want to ban donkey hide export to China. Will it help their cause or fuel illegal trade and theft further? Let's now shift our focus to India. Have you been to a petrol station today? What did you see? Long queues, frustrated drivers, angry passengers? The reason for the anger on the streets of India is not another fuel price hike. It is in fact a soon-to-be implemented law. So why would a law create never-ending queues outside fuel pumps in India? Because there is panic buying of fuel. Why is there panic buying? Because truckers across Maharashtra, Punjab, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, they're all protesting against the soon-to-be implemented criminal code in India. It is called the Bharatiya Nyay Sanhita, and it is set to replace the colonial-era Indian Penal Code. So what does the new law entail, and why are truck drivers across the country protesting? Because of the high penalties attached specifically to hit-and-run cases within the new law. Hit-and-run cases can now attract up to 10 years in jail. Also, a fine of 7 lakh rupees, that's more than $8,000. As you can imagine, for a truck driver ferrying essentials across borders in India, this is a very high sum. So drivers of commercial vehicles are asking, how will they pay such a fine in the event of an accident? In fact, the president of the Truckers Union in Punjab has said this will destroy truckers in the state. There's no denying that hit-and-run cases are a menace in India. Every year, around 25,000 people die and another 43,000 are left injured in hit-and-run cases across the country. There are fears that these protests will continue, and so supply of crucial goods will take a hit. That includes fuel. You see, drivers of thousands of tankers which ferry fuel to petrol pumps, the same ones which you and I use, all those drivers are part of this protest. Hence the panic buying, hence the long queues. What we're staring at currently is a possible fuel crisis in the coming days. So much so that some cities like Aurangabad in Maharashtra say that fuel pumps in the district may go dry later today. Now let's talk about the law in question. One particular clause concerning hit and run needs to be noted. It says, and I'm quoting, "Whoever causes death of any person by doing any rash or negligent act not amounting to culpable homicide and escapes from the scene of incident or fails to report the incidents to the police officer soon after the incident shall be punished with imprisonment of either description of a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine." So basically, the punishment for such hit-and-run cases has gone up from a 2-year jail term to 10 years in jail. Truckers are angry. They're asking who will feed their families if they're in prison. They feel the law is unfair to poor drivers. Private transport operators say that this new law will lead to unjust punishments. Here's what you can expect in the coming days. If the protest continues, the fuel crisis will only worsen. You'll see more long queues at the petrol pump. The strike has already impacted movement of 5 lakh vehicles in Madhya Pradesh. Some petrol pumps in Nagpur in Maharashtra have already run dry. In Maharashtra, the School Bus Owners Association says that school buses would only operate till they run out of diesel. In Chhattisgarh, more than 12,000 private bus drivers are on strike. And for Himachal in the north, the strike has hit the tourism sector because no tourist can currently find a cab to move around. We now turn our attention to a devastating situation in Ukraine. Russia has launched a major and powerful missile attack on Kyiv, employing some of its most sophisticated weapons, including hypersonics. Our next report brings you the details. Take a look.
Chaos engulfed Kiev early Tuesday morning. Russian missiles and drones struck the city. This massive area attack targeted not just the capital but other cities too. The air assault follows President Putin's promise of retaliation. He vowed to respond to an alleged Ukrainian attack on Belgorod last Saturday, which claimed the lives of 24 Russians. According to Ukrainian Air Force, the large-scale attack in Kiev used hypersonic missiles. These are among Russia's most advanced weapons and are generally used for strategic purposes. Air raid sirens sounded continuously as missiles blissed the city. Kiev's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, revealed significant damage. Debris from intercepted strikes led to fires and power outages, making the harsh winter conditions even more difficult for everyday Ukrainians. The strikes affected several areas, including a large warehouse. 16 people were injured, while initially no deaths were reported. Subsequent reports revealed that an elderly woman succumbed to her injuries in an ambulance. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, also suffered a similar barrage. Oli Sinyahubov, head of the regional military administration, shared grave losses. The city recorded at least 1 death and 41 injuries. Some reports indicated these are Russian retaliatory strikes in response to Belgorod, while others see it as a continuation of their winter offensive. Interestingly, just a day before the Belgorod attack, Russia launched a massive air assault on Ukraine. This attack resulted in 39 casualties and 160 injuries. The violence extended to hospitals and schools, among other critical infrastructure. According to a senior Ukrainian official, the attack on Belgorod was in response to the Russian air offensive the day before. These developments suggest a growing pattern of military escalation in a war that has dragged on for nearly 2 years. Ukraine, armed with advanced air defense systems from allies, faces a critical challenge. Although well equipped with Western weapons, there is a shortage of surface-to-air missiles. These are essential for defending against Russian missiles, with a vast front line of over 600 miles. Distributing air defenses evenly is a strategic necessity. This improves protection against Russian attack helicopters and fighter jets. Ukrainian forces are struggling to balance their resources. They must ensure adequate defenses for both the front line and key cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro and Lviv. Officials had earlier warned of Russia's plans for major winter offensives, which they expected would be on similar lines as last year. They further indicated that Russia had stockpiled over 800 high-precision weapons. In the recent Friday attack, before Belgorod, Russia penetrated Ukraine's air defenses. They used a mix of drones, hypersonic, ballistic and cruise missiles. Today's assault seems to mirror those tactics. Ukraine is in a state of high alert, facing a dire need for emergency procurement if it is to have a fighting chance. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
When was the last time you heard of a Nobel laureate being sentenced to prison? I'm sure there aren't many instances of such a tragic fall from grace, but it has happened in Bangladesh. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus has been sentenced to 6 months in prison. Why? For violating the country's labor laws. 24 hours back, a Dhaka labor judge found Yunus and 3 of his colleagues guilty of failing to create a welfare fund for their co-workers. Besides Yunus, the 3 guilty include Grameen Telecom director and former managing director Mohammad Ashraful Hassan. The 2 other members of the board of directors, namely Noor Jahan Begum and Mohammad Shah Jahan. So what are the charges against them? There are many, but 3 of them stand out. Number 1, failure to distribute 5% of the company's net profit among workers as stipulated by Bangladeshi law. 2, regularize 101 staff members. And 3, compensate workers for public holidays. These charges against Yunus, who had shown political aspirations in the past, have come as a shock to many. You see, this man is recognized the world over for his efforts to economically uplift the poor, especially women. He's also regarded as the founder of the Grameen Bank, a microfinance organization which makes small loans to the impoverished. Naturally, his supporters are up in arms. They're complaining that the Sheikh Hasina government was hounding him to malign his image. But his critics do not agree. They say this man is no saint. They say his social businesses and ventures have a long trail of corruption. They're calling the labor law violations just the tip of the iceberg. They say there are many more irregularities which Yunus and his team have committed over the years. This is what a leading prosecutor in the case told newspapers. Allow me to quote. He has violated the labour laws of the country. Earlier, the Department of Inspection for Factories and Establishments, which was probing the case following complaints from the workers, gave him 2 opportunities to rectify all the wrongs committed by the company. The matter reached the court because they did not undo the wrongs. As for the jail sentence and whether it was a bit too much, the prosecutor said the judgment was not motivated as the law in Bangladesh applies equally to all Bangladeshis. Fair enough. In any case, Yunus won't have to serve the entire sentence. The court granted him and 3 others a month's bail after they furnished bonds worth 5,000 takas each. Now here's the thing. The Nobel laureate is believed to have had a personal issue with Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. He once shared a good rapport with her, but ever since the government removed him as the head of the Grameen Bank, he has sort of fallen out of favour. Despite his downfall, many continue to hail him as a saviour of the poor, but the Sheikh Hasina government accused him of quote-unquote sucking the blood of the poor. They released reports showing how the bank he ran charged abnormally high interest and used strong-arm tactics to recover loans. In a nutshell, Muhammad Yunus is a man of contrasts and contradictions. He is worshipped by some, loathed by some, and considered corrupt by many. Some even say that he has survived for so long because of his high-profile friends in the West. They say he used his connections to boost his own image and defame Bangladesh. Whatever be the case today, he's a man in trouble. Charges against him have been framed. The punishment has been publicly declared. There's no saying if he'll be able to get out of this quagmire anytime soon. Is the Netanyahu unity government in Israel nearing its end? Is it about to collapse? This question is buzzing in Tel Aviv, courtesy a verdict by Israel's Supreme Court. 24 hours back, it struck down a controversial law which Netanyahu's coalition government had been pushing for months. The 2023 judicial reform, a set of 5 changes to Israel's judicial system and the balance of powers in the country. This law was proposed in January last year. The aim was to curb the judiciary's influence over lawmaking and public policy. You see, since Israel does not have a constitution, it relies on a series of basic laws. The legislation in question would have blocked the court's ability to block certain laws passed by the executive. The legislation would have also given the government the power to appoint Supreme Court judges. Immediately after the reform was announced, there were protests across Israel, questioning the government's intention. The protesters accused the Netanyahu government of being authoritarian and trying to restrict the judiciary's role in the country. Thousands of army reservists also threatened to resign if the law was passed. Their argument was simple. They said this reform would remove a crucial system of checks and balances from the Israeli democracy. They also said the reform would end up giving more powers to conservative politicians who are currently part of the coalition. After months of protest, the law has been struck down. The vote was held on Monday. In a 12-15 verdict, judges of the Supreme Court ruled for the first time that the court had the power to strike down basic laws. 8 judges further voted to nullify a specific quote-unquote reasonableness amendment. Allow me to quote an excerpt from the court's verdict. The government's passing of the law completely revoked the possibility of carrying out judicial review of the reasonableness of decisions made by the government, the Prime Minister and the ministers. Letting the law stand could cause unprecedented and severe harm to Israel's democracy. Now, here's the thing. The Netanyahu government has always claimed that the law is needed to create balance. In the many government branches of Israel, it has also maintained that the aim is to diversify court benches, which many a times put minority interests before national ones. But his critics consider the law a distraction, an attempt to avoid sentencing in a drawn-out corruption trial, a trial in which he, Netanyahu, faces charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. It seems Israel's Supreme Court also agrees. But the question is, what happens now? What impact will this verdict have on Netanyahu's government? Well, if the government decides to ignore the Supreme Court ruling, it could end up destabilizing the wartime coalition. The same wartime coalition that is currently leading Israel's assault on Gaza. There are many within the coalition that are criticizing the verdict and want Netanyahu to overturn it. But doing so could spell trouble for the coalition. There are many voices, in fact, within it who want the verdict to be respected. There are also voices which had opposed the enactment of the reform from the word go. So the choice before Netanyahu is tough. He cannot afford to disappoint his coalition partners by agreeing with the verdict. Neither can he afford the public's wrath during wartime by trying to oppose the verdict. It's a catch-22 situation. We wonder how Netanyahu will get out of this one. And with that, it's a wrap on Gravitas tonight, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
太空蔬菜，我们神17乘组在太空出差期间。
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
We are one, you and I, burning in the sun, rising in the rain, one in celebration, one in pain, one in a tragedy, one for our rights, one in search of hope, one in our fights. One beyond borders. One beyond our race.
This could be one
in the face of adversity. We are one, you and I, and it's our right to know how and why. WION, you are more connected than you know. Everyone loves a contest. But sport isn't just about victory and defeat. When the GOATs in sport speak, you hear it first on WION.
You have to play good cricket over a period of time.
I actually pushed myself right out of the damn tournament.
We go beyond the stats. Our stories are quoted the world over.
At WION, sport is part of our DNA. Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
WION, India's global voice. The channel